ghosts, knowing who your ghosts are, knowing like who your ancestors are, like knowing what are the skeletons in your particular closet. That is really, really crucial. To think that you'll go unpack someone else's skeletons, that's just fashion, but that's not what we really want. That's not the great work.
Welcome to The Ways of Life and Death, a podcast on memorial and memento mori philosophy, aesthetics, and ritual. I'm Tony Wolfe, and my guest is Nadia Hagen-Onuktav, the artistic director of the All Souls Procession in Tucson, Arizona. From its underground origins in 1990 as a memorial event within the Tucson alternative arts scene, the All Souls Procession has expanded into a massive civic parade and festival in which up to 150,000 people commemorate their dead through artistic ritual. Our conversation took place during October of 2021 and focuses on the practice of innovation in ritual space, with a special emphasis on rites of memorial.
To kick off, can you speak to this process of creating sacred space out of the mundane?
I started my career, it's a funny way to talk about it, my life, the thing I do. I started in theater, and theater is by nature an exercise in suspending disbelief, right? No matter where you are in theater, you walk into like a little black box and somebody's going to tell you, now we're journeying to Africa. Now you're in an Egyptian tomb. Now you're in the middle of a supermarket, so you're asking people to suspend their disbelief. And so some of those tools from theater, I used to build that sense of possibility, that sense that anything can happen in the space in this moment. And I think that is really, that ties in with the idea of magic, that anything can happen. That sense of possibility is very, to me, really connected to the feeling of things being sacred. So not being somber necessarily, but the idea that you have of the place that you're in the moment can expand. And so in theater, we would do that with lighting, with sound. Basically, what you want to do is really just immersion. Immerse your participants, your audience, the people that you're with in an experience that you imbibe all five senses. That's always really important in ritual and ceremony, and breath. I think breath is vital, that everyone slows their breath down, pays attention to their breath, and the simplest thing of entrainment, breath work that happens all together, and rhythms that are heard by the group, and then gesture and movement that happen in syncopation. All those things allow for the space to open up to possibility, to place intention.
That it's amazing that you said that, and you basically just ticked off about 3/4.
Those are the boxes. Yeah, I think so. And really, movies do that for us. I mean, it's a very visual thing. We're very good at taking ourselves and projecting ourselves in from a visual, from just our visual sense. And that might be a really modern, in the last, since we got the TV. But I mean, my husband likes to talk about fire, like how ancient people would sit around the fire and you would tell the stories, and then you would look at the fire moving and you would project the pictures onto the fire. So it's just something I think that humans love to do, is project their thoughts into a magical space.
Coming from a performing arts background, I do as well. Can you describe the tension between ritual and performance? Because there are profound differences as well as profound similarities.
Time and expectation. I feel like those two things are very pivotal. So time, in the sense that ritual takes as long as it takes to produce the results that you're trying to get. So a good example is we live here with a lot of Native American culture. I live close to Four Corners. The Hopi have their celebrations, and the Pasquayaki are still embedded in the culture of Tucson. They have a reservation, but they also own sections of Tucson. And so they have a huge Easter celebration that happens every year. And I like to think about their ritual, their celebration, when people have criticized the All Souls Procession or the ceremony at the end and said, well, it's too slow. And that, I think, harkens back to time and also expectation. But that thing like, oh, it's too slow, it's boring, nothing's happening. The Pasquayaki Easter celebrations take 4 to 5 days. You don't get to see most of the ritual because it doesn't happen in one place. It happens all over town, and sometimes it happens in people's houses. Some of it's very intimate, some of it's on display. So there's one big section of the ritual that is always repeated, and that's usually the one where everyone arrives and waits for it to happen. And you could wait 8 hours because they can't get to the point in the ritual, the place, that the thing that everyone wants to see, the action, until all these other things have been performed.
Sure. And
all these other things are contingent. The performance of these other things is contingent on spiritual connection and a time frame that it just really has nothing to do with a modern conception of time.
Yeah.
What should happen in a given time frame.
Sure.
You know, I wake up, I brush my teeth. And that's part of that sacred sense of time being elastic, and your relationship with it is not the same. And so that leads me to expectation. The expectation in this culture, in American culture, is from movies and entertainment. Everything is wrapped up either like a sitcom in a half an hour, or it's wrapped up, in an hour, like limited series, or it's a movie. And so it's wrapped up in 2 hours. And even Americans don't want to watch Bollywood because that's 3 hours. Yeah. So we have these expectations around entertainment and concerts too. That's 45 minutes to 2 hours. So we feel like everything should get compacted into this sort of time nugget, and all the action should happen, and we should have a beginning and a middle and an end, and there should be some action, and you should engage me the whole time. Those are all expectations around entertainment. And that is a tension, because, especially for All Souls, because when I write or engage the community and we write the ceremony, it's not about entertainment. It's about enacting this ceremony and this thing that needs to happen. And I can force it a little bit, but the intention of why we're performing these acts and why we're doing these things is different, obviously, than trying to make your audience happy.
Is it even possible to communicate that to an audience who, understandably arrive at the end of the procession and expect the equivalent of, the end of a rock concert, where it's going to be a sort of a quick, spectacular event, and that's it, and everybody go home?
I have a concise answer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
No. I mean, we right now are in the process of really shifting how we approach the ceremony. We are engaged in conversations around discontinuing the really spectacle part of the ceremony, really limiting the time frame, like how long it takes for us to enact it. And that means we cut lots of things out. And yeah, the tension for us has, the personal tension has been ceremony and ritual are completely inclusive and engaging of the people who are present. And entertainment is all about you watching someone else do something. And that is a real tension. And we are trying to figure out how to embrace and really keep that sense of engagement of everyone who attends the procession in that ceremony at the end. And if there are elements that pop people out and just cause them to look at the ceremony and feel like that's you can do that, but this is me, to do that sort of disengagement, we are looking at cutting those out. And that's difficult because some people, it's for some people it's a disengagement, but then for other people it's inspiration.
Yeah.
You know, to go with you when you do something amazing and difficult and risky. They feel like they've done it too. So some of that is a little bit of writing, writing like social media, like talking to people, like with the tools we have to talk about our intention and talk about what we would like, to have as far as engagement from the audience. And originally we were very clear about no spectators, which is also a tenet of Burning Man.
Yep.
And we really appreciate their 10, I forget what they call them. They're not rules, but they're like 10 things of Burning Man that are like their value system. And we really adhere to a very similar value system. And one of those big things is no observers.
Yeah.
At that point where you pop yourself out of the picture and you go, well, I'm watching you do this, but we're not doing this together, you've sort of messed up the whole thing.
Okay, so allowing that to procession itself is a large-scale ritual. Can you describe some of the smaller rituals that take place prior to and during the event?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that's really very much in the nature of woven into the tapestry of All Souls is our geography, is our proximity, our location, that we're very close to Mexico. And many of the participants and many of the folks that live in Tucson don't, even though there was a border imposed by other people, many of the people who live here really don't ascribe to the border. They don't recognize that border. To them, that border is purely political. And what they know is that they have relatives that live over there. And somebody drew a line and said, well, now they live in a different country. But to them, they're like, well, those are my relatives and they live over there. So, and in the scope of things, looking back hundreds to 100, 200, 300 years, no borders. So there is also a sense of timelessness. There is a sense here in Tucson where people time things differently. And so 100, 200, 300 years doesn't seem so long to them. This is one of the longest continuously habitated places in the world. So it makes our sense of history and our sense of selves being here, it elongates it. And that might be part of why All Souls arises in this place and has the sense of making sense. To the small rituals, I wanted to point out that connection to Mexico, because there is already a tradition that is embedded in Dia de los Muertos, and it comes with its own rituals. And so many people will always build ofrendas this part of the year. So they will build altars in their houses, in their yards. The art galleries here will create community altars that people can all come to. There's a sense of the season. Some of the rituals are inextricably tied to the culture, to the geography, to the weather. It's very, very hot. I'm sure you guys know, like Tucson is hot as fuck. So that's like our little thing. It's a dry hate. There's little things we like to say about Tucson. It's been very, very hot. And so what's similar in a lot of other cultures, that sense of rebirth happens when you're coming out of winter. Winter is the jaws of winter, and everything dies. And then everything is reborn in the spring. So for us, everything is reborn now. The summer is so hot that it kills everything. Everything dies. Your garden dies. The animal, your friends, we die. Like our suicide rates go up. It's very intense, like boiling, cooking kind of time. And this is our spring. Okay. So now it's not 110. Now the days are 85, 86. And you can see everything begin to come back to life around us. The butterflies come. So some of the ritual is you get to go out of your house in the daytime. You get to stand out in the sun and enjoy the sun. There's a sense of rebirth. And I think that is really interesting when you place it against these rituals of death, because here in this region, death is inextricably tied to the rebirth. Mm-hmm. There's no, we can't pull it, you can't pull it apart. It's the same thing. That cyclical nature is a little bit, I mean, compared to a lot of the world, sort of turned on its head.
As you're saying that, in so many places, traditions descending from Northern Europe and so forth, yes, death tends to be associated with the night and with darkness, and especially with cold, because that was the killing season.
Right. And for us, it's the heat. The heat is the killing season. And now our spring is, and so I think that's a really interesting construct as far as time and culture is Halloween and all these Western traditions that butt up against this other tradition. And so I think lots of little rituals come from being able to just go back outside and tend to your garden. There's almost these springtime rituals where you would go out and like everything in your yard is dead, and now you need to go and like bury it or clean it, or just make these assessments about all the various things that are around you in your yard, in your life, and what nature is doing around us. And so much more sociability, so much more. So a lot of the ritual becomes social connection, because we get really walled off into these like little colder, environments that we can control that aren't like so crazy hot. Yeah. Now comes this time where you could like go hiking. You could just bike to your friend's house. You can like these things that you can't do during the summer. Those all become tiny little rituals that people engage in, that sort of opening up and blooming and considering all the fun things that they might go do.
And then there's a sense that the All Souls Procession is like a culmination of that process. Okay.
Yep.
I was personally intrigued when I saw the Many Bones, One Heart documentary. The urn bearers who developed these memorial gestures, which is something I do in my own practice. And could you speak to that a bit? The inspirations, the function that those gestures help.
Yeah, I can speak to it in going back to that other place of my personal relationship with theater, really infusing my approach. I growing up didn't have rituals to fall back on. I wasn't raised in a particularly religious environment. It wasn't at all.
Yeah, me neither.
It wasn't religious at all.
Yeah.
It was conveniently religious when it felt like it might, when there might be something to be gained by going to temple, but otherwise not so much. And when I say theater, I guess I need to refer to my history of founding a circus theater, a theater that was very much based on physical performance and pantomime and gesture. So not a theater based on text or words, but a theater more concerned with dance and how to express ideas through that.
Sure.
And so the nature of the different performances that were spread out through the procession came from the troupe that I had. I still have Flam Shen, and the various disciplines that were in that troupe. So we would have everyone, we had dancers and we had stilt walkers, we have fire performers, we have aerialists, and they're not necessarily broken out into different groups like some people have, like 3 or 4 or all of those different skill sets.
Yeah.
But in the context of All Souls, we wanted to be able to share those skill sets with the community. We wanted to be able to teach those things in workshops. So we would break them out into the various disciplines and teach workshops. And the ambassadors really came from the want to engage non-performers, folks who had no dance history, no performance history, or, I mean, they also could, but we really wanted to make it so that, because for someone to walk on stilts, they have to have a certain amount of tenor in their body. And aerial, that bar is set even higher as far as physical endurance and strength. So we wanted to have this place that was really easy to engage.
Sure.
And building choreography, that was how the gestures arise, and they still arise, is from a practice and a kind of like a process around how to build choreography that is organic, that comes personally from that person's body and experience, and is then crystallized or kind of formed. So Torne Wolf heads up the ambassadors and the attendants. She has for many, many years, she has lots of music and dance background. And so she'll work with people to go through this process. Usually it's a month's worth of workshops. And people engage all the different senses. They journal, they listen to music, they go on field trips, they make costumes. So it's like crafty and use your hands. They make costumes, they make props, and all this sort of synthesizing of their personal experience through these different filters. That creating of gesture is one of those. It's one of those exercises.
So it's not that after all of that, the creation of the memorial gesture is the culmination, but that's one of the aspects that go into creating their. And
it's the aspect that we are going to see. It's the sort of the tip of the iceberg that we're going to see during the ceremony, that they know that they're going to publicly share. So in that aspect, when you journal, you write for yourself, or when you're making, but the building of the costume, certainly, and the gesture, they know that these are the ways that they are going to communicate their process to their audience, to the other people who are participating.
Right. And the fact that the audience won't necessarily understand the detail of the symbolism is less important for ceremonial purposes than the fact that the symbol is performed by that person at that time, at that place.
I think that it's so, I mean, that goes back to my thoughts around like soul, you know, even like soul music. Like if somebody can sing a song and if there's no soul, if they have no soul when they sing that song sucks. Sure. And it doesn't matter how good that song is, right? Someone can not even sing very well, but have so much soul and so much intensity and intention that is what makes art great.
Yeah.
Right. Is that that you imbue soul into the piece. And
duende
so yeah,
in Spanish.
Huh?
It's the idea of the duende in
Duende.
Spanish, Lorca's essay.
Sí, duende. Yeah, exactly that. The spark, the magic, the soul. Yeah, and so I've always felt, but it's also my leaning that I really love. And I mean, I am very bifurcated in my way of approaching or thinking about All Souls, because to me, it is a big art project in that way that there are qualities of ritual and ceremony that I love, but I don't want to hearken back to a sort of sense of, there's just so much baggage in the occult, in Western occult tradition. There's just so much crap there that I just don't want to bring it with me. I don't want to unpack it. I guess I always felt like to make art meant that I'm not putting anything upon you. I'm not like trying to recolonize you with my ideas about magic and things. What I'm making this thing, and if you love it and you appreciate it, then come make this thing with me. Okay. And if you're like, whoa, I don't want to make that thing, you never have to feel like somebody's sort of putting their dogma upon you. That was always really important to me in this process. And it's a bit of a, woo,
yeah, right? I can see that there would be a tension there, because on that basis, you don't want to explain, or you certainly don't want to over-explain, but you don't want to impose meaning. But yeah, on the other hand,
I never wanted to get dogmatic. I never wanted to, and then there's a tension there too, because for years, newspapers in particular, the media really likes, they need to put everything in print. So they need to have everything sort of well-defined, and they need everything to be sort of black and white. Yeah. And so they would come to me like every year and they'd be like, well, what do people need to do? I'd be like, fucking I know what you need to do. Yeah. Like, what kind of question is that? And they'd be like, well, should they paint their face? It's just like, yeah, if they want to, paint your face if you want to. So then I'd launch into my whole thing about, which is kind of getting around to that other place that we were talking about before we started, which is, that's the concept of knowing your ghosts, knowing who your ghosts are, knowing like who your ancestors are, like knowing what are the skeletons in your particular closet. That is really, really crucial. To think that you'll go unpack someone else's skeletons, that's just fashion, but that's not what we really want. That's not the great work. That's not the work we're really trying to do here. What we're trying to do is unpack our own baggage, right? Is to find our own skeletons, is to honor our own ancestors and our own ghosts, and to not get stuck, to not have spirit get stuck, to not have intention get stuck, to facilitate the cycle, of life and rebirth and nature. and these things with ourselves and with our friends and our neighbors.
People put their prayers into the urns that are borne by the attendants. They're all placed into this great big structure, and it's hoisted up into the air, and then ceremonially it's burned. And so, yeah, allowing that, probably every individual in an audience of, I don't know, 50,000 people will have their own response to that. What is your general feeling? What is your feeling about how the mass of the crowd feels about that symbolism?
The feeling when the urn burns is indescribable. It is that, and that is the goal, right? That is to create something altogether that is beyond. It's beyond your own understanding. It's beyond the understanding of any individual. Most people burst into tears.
Okay.
So 50,000 people are crying. Yeah, if we had to say what our goal was with it, it's release.
Catharsis.
It's the sense of, yeah, catharsis. It's the sense of release. It's the sense of, yeah, I mean, I think, or liberation. The release is the largest thing, is that things tend to get, especially grief, trauma, pain, sadness, they tend to be a little ball of yarn, it gets very tangled up on itself. And then you can just keep like fussing with the ball of yarn, and like it gets, can get all tangled around you. It gets all, and then for some reason to take the ball of yarn and just put it in with everybody else's, that is a really big moment. It's this intense reminder of our fragility and our humanity and our mortality, that all our hopes and dreams and all the things that we hold on to and all the things that we think are so important and all the things that pain us and drag us down and trouble us, everyone has those. Yeah. That's everybody. That's being human. So you take those, the biggest tragedies you have, and you put them in this big container with everybody else's, foibles and losses and griefs and pain, and we let it go.
What advice would you give to people who might be inspired to create their own versions of the All Souls Procession? And we'll have to assume, for practical purposes, that we're talking a much smaller scale than what you people have achieved in Tucson over 31 years.
Yeah, I want to go back to that that idea of knowing your ghosts and knowing the skeletons in your closet, and authenticity. I think that is the most important thing. I think it's great to see things, like to look at All Souls and really be critical. Look at it and go, what is it in that I, that if I was building something, to look at, I could use the example like Burning Man. If I looked at someone else's festival, say, what are the elements in there? Really break it down, that I think are so engaging, that I think are so important. But not to just take them and try to transplant, like try to take a eucalyptus and just put it in your yard and hope that it's happy and think that now you made an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. That sort of idea of like transplanting something from somewhere else and thinking that you'll put it in your garden and it will grow. It may grow, but that is not that's not the whole thing. That's not the ecosystem, right? Yeah. It's really looking out in your geography, your environment, where you live, and figuring out how to take the elements from something that you find to be so engaging and so interesting, and how to create them with the materials and the people and the talent and the culture that you have where you are. because that is what makes it authentic. That is why All Souls works, because of where we are, because of who is here, and because it organically grew out of this environment. And I think that is part of it. Is like the seed, you know, if you're someone who creates content, if you're someone that it wants to, you know, engage in propagating culture, then you have a seed and you're planting that seed, you know, with your own intention of what you want this seed to do to benefit your community.
Yeah.
When this thing comes of fruition. But if it's not embedded in the environment, if it's not part of that ecosystem, it won't really flourish. It won't be real.
As you were describing that, expressing that philosophy, I had the vision of people doing sort of seed, I suppose there'd be parties where you're creating your vision for the experience in miniature. And then I think that's almost how the All Souls Procession started. It was originally a procession rather than a party, but it was very, very local, very specific.
Yes.
And then over time it grew naturally, and then it snowballed and so forth. I'm just imagining if like an event, a social event, I don't know if it happened in someone's house or on a beach or in a park or whatever, but where the aesthetic and kind of the philosophy and the ritual was modeled for whatever someone's local version of an All Souls procession or an All Souls event would be. And then if it works well enough, then I guess people want to do it again, and maybe more people get involved. And
I'm really inspired by rituals that happen like all over the world. I mean, I want to go to Brazil and put the flowers in the ocean for Yemaya, but it would be, and people do honor Yemaya in the All Souls procession and stuff. You know, people do bring the traditions from other places, but yeah, a thing is really vital because it's a conversation between the geography, the history, the ancestors that are buried underneath you when you're walking on them. I mean, that all of that is a conversation. I think what's lovely about that is it's not a McDonald's, right? It's not a franchise. You can't like take the burgers and the fucking arch and just move it somewhere else and have it be like the same burgers like that. It won't, that's not what it is. It's not going to work. Everything has to come in this very, it needs to grow informed, fully informed, or with an openness to always be willing to be re-informed and rebirthed and re-investigated every time it is presented.
Yeah.
And that culture.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So I can imagine from what you're saying, the equivalence of new versions of the All Souls procession arising from particular neighborhoods, perhaps. But it's not something that's apt to happen on a city scale, let alone on a national scale. It's got to start very specifically, very locally.
Oh, I mean, it wouldn't be the same thing. I don't think so. I think the important quality is people learning that skill set. We call it festival culture. Learning how to craft, how to dance, how to parade, how to envision a character and then enact it. Yeah. A lot of it is theater skill, is kind of bringing back this sense of populist theater, enactment drama, this sense of drama. It's interesting that in a way, the pandemic has kind of put people in that place to do that. They just enact these like sort of personal dramas and then put them on TikTok. But it's still, in a really interesting way, that skill set, which was really, really lost for sure during my generation. It was like non-existent. I think the closest thing we got to remembering drama was punk rock, right? Was going to like some shitty warehouse with some people that didn't know how to play their instruments, playing like super shitty chords, and everybody just like making energy happen.
Yeah.
Right. Even a mosh pit, it's just your willingness to just throw your body into that pool of bodies and just enact.
Yeah,
right.
There was something happening in the zeitgeist of the 70s, well, the 80s growing out of the 70s, I think. I mean, the 60s and 70s were like, okay, those were the old rules and we're not doing that anymore. And that had a substantial effect on the culture. But then in the 80s, it was like, well, okay, what do we do with that? If there are no rules and all of the old rights are dead.
I feel like the 80s was a real angry backlash against the hippies for not succeeding.
I would say that there was an element of that, but I think people talk about the hippies in the 60s, but in my opinion, it was more the 70s where the survivors of the counterculture that began in the 60s really started to put their stuff into action. And that was also when it spread out far enough from the very specific, really San Francisco during the Summer of Love. That was where everything kind of happened. But then it took time for those ripples to actually spread out geographically, but also culturally. That stuff didn't hit New Zealand until at least the 80s. But I know what you mean about punk rock being a backlash against the hippies for not following through. But on the other hand, they were only able to do that because the hippies had shaken things up so much that punk rock became possible.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is definitely a response or the next step or the sort of the answer, right? In a long historical conversation where one generation sort of answers and responds to the lack, or to the zeitgeist of the moment, to what is missing. And for sure, me being Gen X and my partner as well being Gen X, and a lot of the folks that really started the procession, for sure that underground culture really pervaded like how we approached. I mean, one of the biggest things, we were talking about this too, like, doing things on the underground, being guerrilla about it. There came a point where we had to engage the civic structure for the safety and well-being of the people who were showing up to All Souls. Once it got to 5,000, 6,000 people on the street, that was not underground anymore. That was then civic. And we needed to start engaging and having conversations just to keep the container, just to keep people safe. And at that point, it had proliferated out of the art scene, the music and art scene that it had grown up in, and it had like popped out. And now it was many, many people who came with many, many different intentions and different backgrounds and different ideas about what they thought this was. And I think we're still a little bit playing catch up with that part of the culture, as far as like, and that kind of speaks to a point that you made earlier, but that sort of education of the intention of the thing. Definitely there's lots of people who critique the event and say, well, it's too big and it's just a party and people don't really care and they're not really there to do the thing that really matters. I think those are all growing pains. I mean, I think those are all reasonable critiques, but I also think that, trying to stay small, well, it wasn't possible. And it's not possible for me to uninvite people.
Thanks for listening to The Ways of Life and Death. My guest was Nadia Hagen-Onuktav, the Artistic Director of the All Souls Procession in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm Tony Wolfe.